much and good evening. I will relate mainly to the first two issues that are really in the headlines and are salient issues in our agenda. The first one being the peace process, that with the Palestinians, the negotiations, and the topic that are political and the effort that is trying to curb the Iranian effort to achieve nuclear weapons. I would like to preempt my comments on both these topics with one basic statement. In both these statements, we have at times various controversies and with our friends around the world, one vis-à-vis the negotiations with the Palestinians, and of course vis-à-vis the interim agreement and the conditions perhaps for satisfying, acceptable agreement vis-à-vis the nuclear program in Iran. Sometimes, of course, these may rouse quite tough discussions, but that is acceptable. But there is one pillar, and I think one of the pillars of our national security is that strategic alliance with the United States. The United States have many a friend around the world. And Israel has many a friends, but such an alliance for so long-standing, for so many years, is truly America. That is Israel's longest-standing friend, and we have to preserve these very special, outstanding ties with the administration and with the American Congress, and we would like this to last, and we have to work at it, especially after we've heard these rather strident voices a week ago that we heard from Boogie Ya'alon, our Minister of Defense, and I'm saying that in the light of those words that he said. When you cast personal aspersions, well, it's not in our NIMBY, it's not in our backyard, and it's not here in our school, because when things are being said in a closed room, in a different situation, when you reach the media and it reaches such dimensions, then it commits us to an immediate apology. And what I did not understand then and even now is why did it only happen partially a few hours later? Because even if there's a vehement argument, but there should be an immediate apology, and that one should never cast insults, aspersions against someone who ultimately, even if they're tough, vehement arguments, are our bottom line, our greatest and best allies in the world and friends. And I'm saying that vis-à-vis these topics that I'm now going to talk about that are on really top priority on our agenda. So I would like to say sincerely, honestly, truthfully, first and foremost to us and to the entire world, ladies and gentlemen, there is no peace process. There is a political, perhaps, process, a statesman, we'd call it. There is perhaps a chance. There's a importance. But to my chagrin, but we cannot even see the faintest chance. And I'm talking about Abu Mazen. I haven't really seen that they have true peaceful intentions. One has to say and call the spade and say the truth as it is. He does not support terror and violence like his predecessor Arafat did. But the level of incitement, and I as a minister presented to the government and the international press the actual topics of that incitement, the level of that incitement, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic one in the Palestinian Authority, has reached new climaxes. And I'm talking about the subtext of what Palestinian children are reading in their textbooks and hearing in the classrooms and even some of the television programs, which is the actual state television, Abu Mazen state television. And the subtext is extremely clear. The state of Israel must be eradicated. It must be totally destroyed. And the Jews must be got rid of, if it's by killing them or expelling them, sooner or later. And do not err with this fact. Abu Mazen, and that is an advantage. Yes, he does not actually generate any, he does not finance them, he does not actually motivate these acts of terror against us. But from an ideological point of view, that the person who denied Holocaust in his youth denies nowadays the actual existence of the state, a Jewish state, and its right to its own, to a state, its own state. And I see a leitmotif connecting between Holocaust denial on one hand and the Jewish Holocaust, and the denial of the Jewish resurrection and the resurrection of a homeland and their right to a homeland. And it's as if it's systematic. It's in the educational system. It's in the children's summer camps. The actual official presidial internet site. It's in the summer camps. It's in the schools. It's in the extracurricular activities every single day, 24/7. And after Ahmadinejad from the stage, after he left the stage in Iran, Abu Mazen is now worthy of the title, the #1 anti-Semitic leader in the world. There are others, but they don't work as intensively and daily. In other words, there's a total duality in the sort of, when they talk about peace on one hand and the culture of peace, and at the same time you hear the propaganda from the same tongue, and a sort of injection of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel poison that the children, the Palestinian children, are seeing on their television programs, in the newspapers and the schools, every single hour of every single day. And I'm saying it in pain and in chagrin. And I'm saying it as someone who was a person who belonged to Shalom Achshav, to the Peace Now movement, and who, not because of the terror and violence, but because of the level of incitement, moved over after Oslo Accord to the other camp. And although we're now talking about the whole peace and negotiation process going on, but I'm talking about an added level, an added dimension of that anti-Semitism and that anti-Israeliness that we hear. And we're talking about the vehemence, the sharpness of these messages that are actually being conveyed via the Palestinian Authority. So let us not delude ourselves. We, peace from the Abu Mazen Palestinian Authority, will not receive. We will not see that peace. And therefore it is paramount importance to demand things. And the demand should be to at least request some kind of change, see a change in the future under perhaps a different leadership. That is the basic prerequisite, and that would be to accept a recognition of the right of existence of the State of Israel as incepted as a Jewish state. That is the minimal demand. We recognized a Palestinian state and that it has basic rights. So it is incumbent upon Abu Mazen to recognize the right of the Jewish people and its right to a country of its own. That won't curb that slow dripping of toxicity that they are dripping into the veins of the next generation, but at least will perhaps enable a possibility of a gradual change in the future. These are grave issues, but we need to look at reality straight on, in the eyes of reality. And I'm looking at the entire world. There is no leader who incites on his internet site and on the television, on the official channel, in his discourse, in his conversations, either directly or indirectly, in the meetings that he has. It's not only Israel, it's against the whole Jewish people, against Jews. Not as a people, as a religion, as a phenomenon. There is no other leader in the world who is instigating, inciting to such a degree, anti-Jewish, like in the dismalest times in Europe, in those days, like Abu Mazen is today. So therefore, don't sell us illusions of peace sprouting and burgeoning in the Middle East, and it will all calm down the moment we sign an agreement. If that agreement is signed, and I don't know if it will be signed, it will be a political agreement. But to talk about peace or a peace agreement in these conditions, unless we see an essential change from the roots in the educational system, in their media, on the other side, unfortunately, this is an illusion. And I will tell you something, I will expose something. We decided that we would flood this and expose it over the last few months. And from my minister, we actually showed and displayed an index of this incitement during the negotiations, by the way. We've been doing it in the government, in our Foreign Affairs Committee as well. And following that, as a derivative of that, because of this very widespread survey of this around the world, including a very widespread survey that was actually published in the New York Times, we have been approached, because people were perhaps pressurized on the other side, and we were approached directly and by the Palestinians and from the Americans as well, with the idea or the request that came through the Palestinians that if there's such a severe issue with this incitement, let us now establish a committee that existed many years ago, which was with the Palestinian-American Israeli Commission that existed years ago for issues of incitement. And our answer was negative. I said I object to it. And I said that there's a prerequisite, because if we still want us to consider that kind of committee's establishment, then we have one condition. First and foremost, then Abu Mazen, it's incumbent upon him. Why should we have that committee? Because after all, he personally, on his Presidium Guard, which is his official internet site that he's identified with, that he preaches every single day and conveys these messages. He himself is doing it, talking about the lack of existence of Jewish people, and therefore they have no rights as a people, let alone a country of their own, plus anti-Semitic, very grave messages about the continuation of the war, and that ultimately, at the end of the day, Israel will disappear and a Palestinian state will then be established from the sea to the Jordan River. And they actually have been seen on his even side. I am not accepting hypocrisy. There was a commission in the past, but it didn't actually change the picture. So if he is willing, personally, immediately, and immediately delete all those anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli expressions from his Presidial Guard site directly, immediately, and from, in one fell swoop, overnight, he will command the Palestinian television to stop broadcasting any such incitement over the television, internet, whatever, radio, And if then he still wants to consult with us and to actually even consult with us about how to generate a change on how to change the textbooks, for example, because that isn't something you can do overnight. The content, how do you create a whole educational system whose messages are from the elementary levels totally different, then we can actually think about it. But you cannot ask us to sit down at a committee for the prevention of incitement when you, the president of the Palestinian Authority, you on your internet site and on your state official television channel are doing it directly and promoting directly these incitement messages. Yes to cooperation, but no hypocrisy, and excuse me, that is unacceptable. A committee that might just make people feel that it's being dealt with while the incitement continues and is ongoing. Excuse me, NIMBY, not in my backyard or in my school. And had we been willing to actually persuade ourselves that we would be willing to make concessions, and that is what we did, that we may at long last achieve that peace that we were yearning for. And yes, we may actually sort of achieve some kind of political advances with the Arab countries, but peace, unfortunately, I can't see it happening in the near future. Because this is the way things are. I'm not saying that we have to negate it altogether. I support this process and the negotiations, and I still do envision a certain chance that perhaps things will change. Perhaps we will be able to advance something a little more positive. But since this is the way things are, then we have to be extremely wary and cautious and say one thing: to our deep chagrin, no agreement, no political agreement, peace agreement, will ensure our security. And therefore, we need to be extremely cautious vis-à-vis security issues. And that is why I would like to show you certain salient issues vis-à-vis security if we do actually then face the possibility of signing some kind of interim agreement or other agreement with the Palestinians. But unfortunately, there is no such thing. Perfect security arrangements that are truly satisfying. That does not really exist. Any security arrangements that could truly promise our security in this region, in this complex, tough neighborhood. And therefore, we need to assume that we need to aspire to the best kind of security arrangements, but pay attention to what's happened, and unfortunately you've got to learn from your future in hindsight for a moment. What happened in the last decade that made us in those days delude ourselves that it was possible to stabilize through security arrangements our security, for example, after we withdrew from a certain area. Oslo A and Oslo B, we evacuated the main Palestinian towns in Judea and Samaria. And we relied on the fact that the Palestinians, with an international backing, would ensure, according to its commitments in A and B, that there wouldn't be any incitement and, of course, definitely no violence, and they would ensure the continued demilitarization of these areas, and there'd be no incitement and no violence. What was the result? And of course, we also relied on the fact that we are surrounding them in the Jordan Valley, that we are controlling to a certain degree in that area. And what was the result? About 10 years ago, during the Second Intifada, the year 2002, about 12 years ago, we were forced to return to the battlefield and to temporarily take hold of some of them real war and battles, Kilya, Hebron, we'll talk about all the other towns and others as well, after losing hundreds of people, casualties, fatalities, because of terror incidents from people who infiltrated through those Palestinian towns into our territory, causing and perpetuating suicide bomb attacks. And then what happened? We even had to go into the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is a narrow strip, low, and that we can observe it. We are surrounding it from every side except for the Philadelphia axis. And we're talking about our unmanned aircraft flying over it every day, our aircraft above it, which enable us to ensure our security. Moreover, the Palestinian Authority, after all, it is being at the helm of that authority. We have Abu Mazen, who committed publicly to all the media that he is taking responsibility for the entire Palestinian Authority, and when the occupation, the presence of the Israelis in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Authority will then be responsible. There will be no hostilities, no missiles, no rockets. What did he say? The moment the occupation is curbed and ends, there will be no hostilities or terror hostilities or any violence against Israel. We are responsible. And he even deployed 30,000 Palestinian security people. But if we talk about that, the Philadelphia axis in the perimeter, there specific, by the way, I objected to it, and I said that we do need to stay there, which is in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, but that wasn't the result. That wasn't what we agreed to. We're talking about there was a controversy vis-à-vis that issue, and the Prime Minister's Arik Sharon's opinion was different at the time, but there was an agreement that transferred the actual responsibility to the Egyptians, who deployed even their rifles and other things on the southern side of that, and they became responsible of that partially as well with the Palestinians. The Egyptians on the outside, the Palestinians on the inside, and European supervisors and inspectors were there too. Since that moment, since that commitment, where not one will be launched from that moment that we leave the Gaza. Since then, 11,400 missiles and rockets have been launched, in addition to all the terror attempts and terror incidents, including Gilad Shalit and the killing of his friends. In other words, the lesson is so clear that when you withdraw and leave territory, even if you arrange things vis-à-vis security and someone else takes responsibility, the Egyptian on the western side of the Philadelphia axis, international inspectors. But in the Middle East, anything can happen. And nowadays, maybe there are less fatalities in our daily lives when we have that kind of issues with the Gaza Strip. But we're talking about missiles that can even reach, they're still manufacturing them, and their range now is going to be so much longer, and the danger still is something that jeopardizes us. So therefore we should never delude ourselves that there are various perfect security arrangements that can be made. We, at least, that same example in southern Lebanon, we withdrew from the southern Lebanon. We had international forces that were extremely strong. But we know that between the Litani and the international border, 3,000 rockets, and we're talking in the northern part having even more of them. There are about 100,000. We're talking about between 30 and 40,000 in that area that we evacuated, that we withdrew, that should have been supervised and inspected by the international United Nations force according to the resolution that are there, despite all that. And the same, for we're talking about the American withdrawal from Iraq. After all, the Americans, they were in and exerted efforts and resources in Iraq in order to build a state that would be stable regime after the toppling of Saddam Hussein, with, we're talking about governmental institutions and security forces that would be significantly able to prevent terror and a civil war and terror within Iraq. And before their exit, there was a commitment to the citizens of Iraq that we are arranging security issues in such a way so that you will have relative security. We are establishing and training the capabilities of a local force. And just now, look what's happening. Look at the result in Iraq. Look what's happening in Fallujah. The civil strife there between the Sunnis and the Shiites in Fallujah. Just have a look. We'll have a look at Syria. So I'm talking to you in earnest now. No one, not us or our friends, the Americans, and no one else in the world can possibly say to us that there are such security arrangements that can capably promise that Nablus, after some kind of comprehensive agreement, that what happened in the Gaza Strip or in Fallujah in Iraq will not be reiterated in Nablus. No one can promise that wholeheartedly, in earnest, based on facts. And that means that we need to make sure and ensure that we have defensible borders, total control, which is very widespread in the Jordan Valley, and not only in certain points. I'm talking about something that is truly backed by the actual communities in the area, because without it, you cannot forget that we might still, and you have to put that into the equation, that we might still have to fight to defend ourselves, and that various phenomena could evolve that would endanger us, and we would have to fight against. And therefore we need to leave conditions in the field that we'll be able to actually treat these issues and deal with these issues. So let us not delude ourselves. It happened in the Gaza Strip, it happened in the Palestinian towns in the West Bank, it happened to the Americans in Iraq. There are no such perfect security arrangements. The Middle East is in such a tumultuous situation, such turmoil, unstable, and the Arab countries are collapsing from within day in, day out, and no one can say to us that one can stabilize a Palestinian state in such a way that will ensure them and protect them from any radical elements. Who knows what's going to happen in a few years' time? Who can promise it? Who can foresee what a Palestinian entity or authority would look like in 5 years' time? And therefore, I would like to summarize by saying, because people are hinting that my time is running out, and therefore when I'm not going to touch on the Iranian issue. So therefore we just have to stay with our eyes wide open, and when we become involved in any political process, Palestinian negotiations, we have to, on one hand, prevent a binational state, because that could have a detrimental effect on the actual ethos of a Jewish democratic state. And we are not interested in a binational state. And on the other hand, the risk involved, the danger that security issues may start, like in Iraq or the Gaza Strip, following, I'm talking about real security problems that might happen in a few years' time. So we're truly between the devil and the deep blue sea, because there are no easy overnight solutions that can be achieved. And therefore, I would like to summarize by saying that I am saying all this because we have to remain with our eyes wide open on our guard, so that nothing could possibly come into play, and that all these arguments we're allowed and these disagreements we still ought to have, and with our good friends around the world, that we have one true strategic alliance with one country, and we have to guard that with all our might, and that is with the United States. So even if when there are controversies, and even when there are arguments and quarrels, we don't have to agree to every dictate or every demand that the Americans make. But like, again, with the Iranian issue, they have to be run like arguments, quarrels, disputes between friends and allies, and not run them in any other way.